So I read that Jim Carrey and Jenny McCarthy ended their relationship of 5 years and announced it over Twitter. And it made me think about how I don't know much about Jenny McCarthy. She seems, like a good-hearted person when I saw her interviewed once. But Jim Carrey is really an interesting person to me. A lot of his films, not Ace Ventura, but since then it seems a lot of his films deal with spiritual themes that I find interesting. Truman Show, Bruce Almighty, Yes Man, these all have different philosophical and spiritual attributes to them, which I found really interesting. And I tend to like commercial films that have spiritual components to it. There's some independent films that have spiritual concepts, like The Shift with Wayne Dyer, that are a little painful to watch just when you're used to commercial production values and you see a low budget film and bad acting. It takes away, I think, from the message. But Jim Carrey seems to be on a spiritual path, and I say that in particular because he was in some videos that were posted at Eckhart Tolle's website, in which he got to introduce Eckhart Tolle, and Jim Carrey was just giddy about him. And I can understand that, because I think Eckhart Tolle is one of the few Western people, people from the Western world, that is truly enlightened and is an excellent teacher about how to get out of our mind and get into the moment. And so to see Jim Carrey recently and see how excited he was about Eckhart Tolle's work and a chance to be near him even and to introduce him, it made me feel as though there's something about Jim Carrey's process right now that is an awakening, and I think he's going to be fine. I also, another projection that I had when I read this story was that apparently Jenny McCarthy's son and Jim Carrey became very close, and her son has autism and I think connected really well with Jim Carrey. And I don't know what their situation was, but in terms of leaving a situation where there's a child involved or where there's closeness with a child, it reminded me of an experience that I went through when I worked at a group home for a couple years, and the kids there were physically and sexually abused. Most had pretty extreme cases of abuse, and it was intense. And I enjoyed it pretty much for the first year. It was a more rewarding job than any other job that I had had by far. But after about a year, I started to get burnt out and started to not want to be under as much stress as the job somewhat entailed, but was still there for another year because I also didn't want to leave the kids. I started to form strong connections after a year with some of the kids. And so it was like leaving a family, an extended family situation. But the group home director was starting to become more like neurotic and push-pull and just really unhealthy. And so it was really an uncomfortable situation in which I stayed longer than was healthy for me. And I don't know if Jim Carrey had any of that. It's his business about what his experience was with his connection with Jenny's son. But I do believe that it is a rather common thing in which when we bond with somebody, either in a relationship, if there's a child involved, or if we're working with children, it can keep us around longer because of that strong connection, even if there's other dynamics in place that would make us want to move forward. So those are my thoughts.